You think you know Montana, Glacier National Park, the Beartooth Highway, a ranch somewhere under a big sky. But Montana is the fourth largest state in the country with the third lowest population density. And that math means there is a lot of Montana that never gets photographed, or mapped, or remembered. There are towns here that historians cannot fully document. There are cities that got buried under highways. There are places so remote that the mill fell off the mountain and nobody was close enough to hear it. 13 of them specifically. Let's get into it. Number 1, Coloma has an official nickname among historians, Mystery Camp. That is not a marketing decision. It is an admission of defeat, active from 1893 to 1916 in the Garnet Mountain Range east of Missoula. The mammoth mine yielded roughly $200,000 in gold over 20 years. People came, people left, almost no written record survived. The only way researchers have dated the structures is by pulling old newspapers and mail order catalogs out of the cabin walls, stuffed in as insulation. Those paper dates are the primary historical record this place left behind. More than 20 structures remain in ruin. The nearby Sandy Park Cemetery has 5 marked graves and many more unmarked ones, believed to be miners with no family or money for a proper burial. Accessible via the Garnet Backcountry Byway, a rough dirt route north of the better-known Garnet Ghost Town, a town so thoroughly forgotten that the only record of its existence was stuffed into the walls to keep the cold out. The University of Montana is still piecing the story together. Number 2, Ismay is the least populous incorporated municipality in the state of Montana. Population 17. It does not appear on Google Street View. There is no reason for the camera car to go out there. The town cycled through names before settling on one. Sandstone, then Burt, rejected because cursive handwriting made it look too much like Butte on shipping labels. Then Erlingbert, then finally Ismay. Then in 1993, a Kansas City radio station called town clerk Wayne Rieger, while he was in the bathtub and asked if the town would rename itself Joe Montana to celebrate NFL quarterback Joe Montana's trade to the Kansas City Chiefs. 22 people voted yes. They sold t-shirts, coffee mugs, and golf balls and raised enough for a community center, a fire hall, and a fire truck. Joe Montana never visited. In the 1950 census, Ismay had 277 residents. By 2017, 6 miles off US Highway 12 on a gravel road, a church, a post office, a grain elevator, and boarded up houses. They changed the name for a football player who never showed up, raised enough for a fire truck, and called it a win. In Ismay's terms, that actually was a win. Number 3, Coolidge was named after a future president of the United States. Calvin Coolidge reportedly never visited. There are rumors he invested in the mine. The mine failed. The town failed. Coolidge, the president, went on to be president anyway. Built by William R. Allen, a former Montana lieutenant governor who quit politics in 1913 to become a prospector. He bought 80 mining claims and spent over $1.5 million building the Montana Southern Railway, the last narrow-gauge railroad ever constructed in the United States. By 1922, the town had electricity, a post office, a pool hall run by Elmer Ripley, and the Elkhorn Mill, the largest freestanding wooden structure in Montana at the time. Then silver prices collapsed in 1923. Allen lost his fortune. In 1927, the Pettengill Dam burst, destroying 12 miles of railroad track. The schoolhouse eventually fell into the creek. Allen held onto the mine deed until he died in 1953. Today it requires a 1-mile hike at 7,000 to 8,000 feet. Snow arrives early and stays late. A former lieutenant governor built the last narrow-gauge railroad in the United States, named the town after the future president, and died still holding the paperwork. The president never came. The schoolhouse is in the creek. Number 4, Taft, Montana no longer exists. Not because it was abandoned, but because the Interstate 90 was built directly on top of it in 1962. What remains of the wickedest city in America is a freeway exit and a staging area for snowplows. Started in 1907 as an unnamed work camp for thousands of laborers, building the Pacific extension of the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad through the Bitterroot Mountains. The camp had between 20 and 50 saloons, no churches, no schools, only 3 residential homes, and reportedly 500 prostitutes. A Chicago Tribune reporter visited in 1909 and called it the wickedest city in America. Secretary of War William H. Taft stopped through, called the camp a sewer of sin, and a drunken crowd named the town after him on the spot. Peak population estimates range from 3,000 to 10,000 in a town only a half-mile long. Taft burned at least twice before 1910 and was rebuilt both times. When forest rangers called residents to fight the fires of August 1910, most focused on draining the town's remaining alcohol supply instead. The site was paved over when I-90 was built in 1962. A bike trail now passes through the former town site, a single historical marker. The wickedest city in America is now where truckers stop to check their tire pressure. Number 5, Aldridge, 2 miles from the north entrance of Yellowstone National Park, sits a coal mining ghost town that almost nobody visits and very few people have heard of. Major Hoard discovered 5 coal veins near Cinnabar in 1872. By 1901, the Montana Coal and Coke Company had 500 men shipping 650 train cars of coke every day to smelters across the state. The town changed names 3 times. Hoare, then electric after a power plant was built in 1904, then Aldridge, named after the manager sent from Helena to break a workers' strike in 1895. In 1904, the miners struck again and stayed out for a full year. In 1910, the company defaulted on bond payments. 800 residents left essentially overnight. Only one fatal accident was recorded in the mine's entire history. Thomas W. Thomas, killed by an explosion of undetermined cause on August 2, 1901. A few deteriorated buildings remain accessible by dirt road from Gardner, 9 miles south, 9 miles from Gardner, 2 miles from one of the most visited parks on Earth. The town that kept those smelters burning for 30 years gets a dirt road and a crumbling foundation. Number 6, Castletown. Castletown needed one thing to survive: a railroad. The railroad was coming. The mine owners stockpiled ore and waited. The railroad arrived in 1897. The town had been dead for 4 years. In 1883, prospector F.L. Leif Hensley traced silver ore to its source in the Castle Mountains. He and his brothers eventually held interests in 37 mining properties. By 1887, more than 1,000 prospectors had flooded in, staking 1,600 claims. Castle grew to 4 competing newspapers and was compared to Leadville, Colorado. In 1892, railroad investor Richard Austin Harlow began laying track from Lombard, and mine owners promised him $250,000 on completion. Then in 1893, the U.S. government repealed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. Silver collapsed overnight. The mines closed. The population dropped from thousands to fewer than 200 within days. The track reached Castle in 1897, 4 years too late. The last resident left in 1930. Private land today, buried in the Castle Mountains. No paved road. The railroad showed up to an empty town, turned around, and left. That is the entire story of Castle, Montana. Number 7, Beartown. Beartown once had a serious argument for becoming the capital of Montana Territory. It lost that argument because of the gang. One of the earliest settlements in the Garnet Range, Beartown's mines yielded $1 million in gold and silver in 1866. The town then became home to the Beartown Roughs, a gang whose documented reputation for violence ended the territorial capital conversation before it got far. Local folklore holds that a Chinese miner buried a fortune in gold in a 5-pound baking can somewhere in the Garnet Range. That specific detail on the 5-pound baking can has been passed down for over a century. Adventurers are still reportedly searching. The town sits along the Ghost Town Byway, a 26-mile backcountry drive about 35 miles east of Missoula. They could have been the capital. The Beartown Roughs ended that. Now the most interesting thing about Beartown is a can of gold that may or may not exist. People are still looking. Number 8, Pardee's Iron Mountain Mine survived the silver market crash of the 1890s and multiple ownership changes. What finally shut it down was a safety regulation it refused to follow. Perched in Hall Gulch, 10 miles north of Superior in Mineral County, the Iron Mountain Mine yielded $500,000 in profits over 8 years before first shut down in 1897. It was revived and ran profitably for years after. Then in 1906, Montana passed a law requiring all mines to have 2 exits for worker safety. The company, for reasons never explained, ignored it. The state forced closure. The town was abandoned around 1930. At its peak, Pardee had a saloon, a boarding house, dance halls, and a post office. Today it is remote mountainside ruins accessible only by rough trail, $500,000 in silver. Survived the crash of the 1890s. Closed permanently because they would not dig a second door. Number 9, Keystone and the Yaak Valley. The Yaak Valley has 338 residents. No cell service, dial-up internet, one bar, one mercantile, and somewhere in its hills, the remains of a gold mine that collapsed off the mountainside while nobody was paying attention. The Yaak sits in Lincoln County in Montana's far northwest corner, where the Canadian border comes down and the Kootenai National Forest takes over. The first homestead wasn't established until 1906. The Keystone mine produced gold, never the major strike anyone hoped for. The mill was left on the mountainside when the operation closed. In 1984, it was still visible. By the time anyone went looking again, it was gone. 97% of the Yaak is public land. The valley holds an estimated 25 to 30 grizzly bears, one of the smallest surviving populations in the lower 48. Getting there means Highway 508, described by one resident as an insatiable devourer of mufflers. The mine failed, the mill fell off the mountain. Nobody was close enough to hear it. Number 10, Elkhorn is one of the best preserved Victorian ghost towns in Montana. It is also one of the least visited. These two facts are connected in a way that says something specific about how preservation actually works. A silver mining camp active from the 1870s through the early 1900s, Elkhorn produced over $14 million in silver. Then in the winter of 1888, a diphtheria epidemic moved through town. It killed a significant portion of the population in weeks. Many victims were buried in a single mass grave. The buildings remained standing because the departure wasn't organized. It was a response to bodies. 2 Victorian-era structures, Fraternity Hall and Gillian Hall, remain largely intact and are among the finest examples of frontier Victorian architecture left in Montana. A few people still live there, accessible by dirt road from Boulder. The diphtheria killed people faster than the urge to pack. That is the only reason those buildings are still standing. Number 11, Diamond City and Confederate Gulch. At its peak, Diamond City was the largest city in all of Montana, home to more than a third of the state's entire population. Today, there is nothing left. Not a foundation, not a standing wall. The Confederate Gulch Gold Rush of 1864 was one of the richest per square mile strikes in American history. A single pan of gravel reportedly yielded 148 ounces in one washing. The town exploded. Within months, then the gold ran out between 1868 and 1870. What followed wasn't abandonment, the town was dismantled. Buildings were hauled away for lumber. The entire settlement was cannibalized for parts. The Montana Bar section of the Gulch alone produced an estimated $10 million. A dirt road through the Gulch northeast of Townsend. A historical marker near the Missouri River. Nothing else. The biggest city Montana ever had. Gone so completely that the marker is the only evidence it was not a rumor. Number 12. Zortman is not quite a ghost town. A small number of people still live there, which puts it in a specific and uncomfortable category. A town that survived its boom and its bust, and then got handed a $33 million cleanup bill by a company that declared bankruptcy and walked away. Gold was discovered in the Little Rocky Mountains in the 1880s. Zortman grew into a real town. Stores, a hospital, hotels, a jail. The Ruby Gulch mine operated for decades across multiple ownerships. In the later 20th century, it became a large open-pit cyanide heap leach operation that leaked contaminated water into local streams. The company declared bankruptcy in 1998 and left. Montana inherited the cleanup. Located roughly 100 miles from any major city, the open-pit scar is still visible on the hillside above town. Population is now in the single digits. The company left mid-cleanup. Montana got the bill. The town is still there mostly because nobody organized a departure. Some places survive not because they thrived, but because leaving takes effort too. Number 13, Comet is a completely abandoned ghost town in Jefferson County, with one exception. One house in the town site is occupied. Nobody seems to know who lives there. Comet's peak was the 1890s. Up to 300 residents on the eastern slope of the Boulder Mountains. Then the Minds played out and people left gradually over years. The unhurried departure is why 24 buildings are still standing. Nobody was in a rush to strip them for parts. Accessible by rough road about 40 miles south of Helena, the identity of the single remaining occupant has been noted by multiple sources as genuinely unknown. Not reclusive, but documented. Unknown. One light in one window, an entire ghost town with one resident nobody can identify, which is either the most Montana response to solitude imaginable, or the setup to something nobody has fully explained yet. Montana has 147,000 square miles and fewer than 1.2 million people. That math produces a lot of places like these. Towns that burned, towns that got buried, towns that history walked away from without filing the paperwork. The real Montana is not the postcard. It is the mill that fell off the mountain, the baking can of gold nobody has found, and the one house in an empty town with a light still on. If you know an isolated Montana place I missed, drop it in the comments. And subscribe for more forgotten histories.